Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Property Trio. My esteemed co-hosts are here ready with their powder dry to answer some fantastic listener questions that we've had from our beautiful, attractive and well-educated audience. Cate, Dave, how are we this morning?
Great to see you. It's different having to behave ourselves completely because we're recording now on video
that's right,
as well.
we're on YouTube. Thanks for the reminder.
Yes, as at
Almost
the time
forgot.
of record... Sorry, Dave?
Well, I was going to say, last week's is going to be up on YouTube as well, isn't it? That first one that JD just sent through.
Yes, we just need to green light and make sure that we're all happy with our performances. And yes, that's a really important message, I think, to the listeners, is to look out for us on YouTube. We are going to chuck a bunch of that stuff up there, and also to join the Facebook page as well, the Property Trio, because there'll be little snippets and reels and all sorts of things, and you'll be able to see a little bit behind the curtain, because often in audio you can't see some of the facial expressions where I'm sort of giving one of the co-hosts a dig in the ribs, which, you know, it's just speaking to my immaturity.
All the time.
Yeah. All right, so we've got two listener questions that we're going to try and get to today. The first one is from Nick Papadatos, who's a big fan of the show, and thank you for the kind words. He's listened to about 100 of the episodes, which
great stuff, Nick.
Great
That's a
commitment.
good start.
If we had some merch, we'd send you some, but
maybe we should put some together.
Yeah, we don't. Anyway,
No budget, Dave.
Well, 3 caps saying the Property Trio.
Now, Nick and his wife have some other investment properties, but just getting to the meat of the question. His question is, our principal place of residence home loan is fully offset, but we plan to turn it into an investment property in the future. We're fortunate enough to have both our own savings in the offset account as well as some funds parked there by a parent, so they don't pay any interest. Love that. The loan... the loan repayments are principal and interest, therefore each month they're paying a big chunk of the principal owing, but only stick to the minimum repayment amount. After listening to so many episodes that mention preserving tax deductibility, I'm questioning whether this is the right strategy. Still got me?
Yep.
As there might be potential to switch these loans to interest only, therefore minimising the monthly repayment amount and preserving as much future deductibility as possible. This also would help our cash flow savings because we'd have more surplus cash each month to put towards our next purchase. Now, on the other hand, the more principal that is paid off, the more borrowing capacity we may have for future lending if we refinance to do an equity release. There's also a chance that the parent takes their money out of the offset to use in the future, and we'd therefore need to start paying interest again. So the lower amount owing at that time, the better off we'll be. Now, as a little bit of an aside, if you do make a mistake and you pay too much of that loan before switching to principal place of residence as an investment, couldn't you just refinance back to 80% LVR in order to again maximise the tax deductibility of the loan interest?
That old chestnut.
Yes. Yeah, do you want to throw it at the loan for fear of it being locked there forever and you're unable to get it? I want to start with you on this, Cate, because there's probably quite a lot of stuff for Dave to jump in from a lending perspective, but I think it's important when we're just looking at this as sort of technicians to take a moment to look at some of the things that they've done really well. What are the standouts for you?
Yeah, I think that getting to this financial position at this age is amazing. I mean, these guys are young, considering what they've achieved, 30, 34 and 33 with a baby. And they've been really good with their cash flows. And the fact that they're aware of these questions to ask, I think, puts them in front of the game. It really does. And, they've already got a principal place of residence and they've got an investment property. And they're talking about going on to do another investment, then obviously converting what they're in now to an investment and then getting the forever home. Like, that's very aspirational for most people. Yet these guys have these decisions at their doorstep. So I think that's what they've done really well.
Yeah, at 34 and 33, they've got a 3-month-old baby and planning another one in the next few years. Monthly cash flow surplus of 10 grand. I mean, I could take their correspondence course on maturity, I think, based on some of the antics in the last couple of episodes.
Yeah, look, they've done really well. They're in a fantastic financial position already, and that takes discipline and dedication to get to that level. So, they're a great example for everybody out there and all our listeners.
Now, with respect to the parents parking their money in their offset account, I mean, firstly, amazing strategy, right? Because if they're happy to just park it there as a little bit of I suppose it's a gift because they could be earning money on that. But I want to hear from both of you about how that can really influence the game, because I'm presuming we're talking about a pretty big sum of money there that would make a big difference to their strategy. So what do you think about that?
Look, I might go first from a moral point of view and then let Dave talk through the finances here. Parents do this often. It's not the first time I've heard about it, and it won't be the last. It's for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes it's, to pop money somewhere because they're not wanting it on their balance sheet for whatever reason. Other times it's because they don't need it and they're happy to help their children out. But in a lot of cases, when people do have others' money sitting in their account, they're often on the hook to pay them interest. There's an agreement between the two. And, the ATO recognises agreements like that. You can borrow money from anywhere. It doesn't have to be a bank as long as it's all above board. But the question is, does that arrangement impact their borrowing capacity? So if they're paying interest, if they're not, different scenario altogether. If it's a gift that they're feeling like they may gift back, I'm not sure how that works with the ATO. But the real question for me is, what sort of burden does it create? Does it make you feel like you've got someone else who needs to approve what you want to do with the money or approve how you're living your lifestyle? Not suggesting these parents do, but I've seen it before. You can be a little bit restricted and tied in knots if you feel like you owe someone else insight into your financial decisions. Now, the other thing that we need to be mindful of is, what is their plan B? If the parents do decide to claw it back and need it, does that impact their cash flows, their decision making going forward? Does it put them in a position where they feel they need to divest something? They're the real questions that people need to ask when someone else's money is involved like this.
Interesting point you raise about, you borrow money from someone. It's almost like you have sort of a requirement to justify some of the choices that you make. I mean, I've never borrowed money from family members because I can imagine going out to lunch with them and ordering the market fish for $43 and they're like, "Oh, did you see the gnocchi was here for $26?" It's almost like, you still owe us a bit of money there. You're spending it. No wonder you're not paying it back. It's a tricky one, right?
Yeah, and who knows what? I mean, that's the thing about getting a listener question. We get a little bit of insight. They sound like a really tight-knit family and they're making great decisions together in unison. But as a general point that I wanted to make, these are the things that you need to think about when you've got someone else's money sitting in your account.
All right, Dave.
Yeah. I mean, in a situation like that, and it comes up reasonably regularly, and obviously it's a key component of anyone's borrowing considerations. And, it sounds like it's a loan. But it's an interest-free loan by the way they've worded it. So it's saving them a significant amount of interest, but it also sounds like they won't be able to hold on to it forever. Yeah. So what that means in terms of your planning is that you actually do need to plan as if you don't have that money. And really that's the starting point for this couple in this situation. So for your future plans, you need to factor in that you don't actually have access to that money and ensure your decisions are still affordable if you do need to give this money back at some point in time, which it sounds like they do. If it's offsetting, you've still got that loan facility there, so it doesn't actually really change your borrowing capacity because you've got a full loan, and a lender will always assume base your borrowing capacity on the limits or the balances of your loans, irrespective of how much you are fortunate enough to have in offset. So basically, that's essentially how you need to approach it. There's obviously the emotional side, which you guys were just talking about. But in terms of a pragmatic, property planning and mortgage planning perspective, that's how you go about it.
What about the original question where we're talking about the loan repayments on the PPOR, principal and interest, so therefore they're paying a big chunk of the principal, and they're sort of asking the question, should it be interest only rather than principal and interest given their situation?
Yeah, look, basically they're currently 100% offset. So although the interest rate is a little higher on interest-only loans, I would certainly suggest moving to interest-only because firstly for them right now, and this might change if they have to give that money back to their parents, the repayments are nil. So even if the interest rate's higher on the interest-only to the principal and interest, it's not going to impact their position from a cash flow perspective. But overall, as they said, they're preserving the loan balance, whereas principal and interest is reducing the loan balance. And so why take this action? So by preserving the loan balance, you'll have more tax deductions, as you rightly noted, when you turn this property into an investment. You'll also have a bigger cash buffer to go towards the future home. So, and why is this? It's because you're saving more money each month that otherwise would have been going towards reducing the principal. So this means you'll need to borrow less to purchase the future home, and therefore you'll have less non-deductible or bad debt on the future home. So in terms of the question about it impacting your borrowing capacity, well, which is the reason you were considering not doing it, this is basically netted off because the existing loan will be, yes, the existing loan will be greater because you haven't paid off the principal. And so let's just call that $50,000 that you haven't paid off between now and, purchasing your future home. But that's then $50,000 extra dollars you have in savings that can be used to lower the amount you need to borrow for the future home. So your loan amount for the future home will be $50,000 less and your investment debt will be $50,000 more. So in essence, your end position will be very similar. So any impact on borrowing capacity will be nil or negligible.
So we're saying interest only because they're going to transition to an investment property. Is that the one caveat? If they do decide that they're staying there, your advice would be different?
If it changes to become their forever home, then the advice would be different. But at this stage, it seems like they're reasonably clear they do plan to purchase a future home.
Yep.
So, and the thing is, you can always course correct down the track. If you went interest only today to preserve the debt, and ideally you would have done that from earlier on, knowing it was going to be an investment property, and then you changed your mind or it wasn't affordable to upgrade or you decided you are happy with this property now as a long-term home, you could always then, start paying principal and interest. The money you've saved and sat in the offset account, if you wanted to, you could pay it into the loan. So the cost is only the difference between the interest rate on an interest-only loan versus the interest rate on a principal and interest loan, if you take that pathway.
And I suppose getting into the question about, what if they've overpaid and they wanted to refinance the loan? It sort of begs the question, is it better to be paying money off a loan that they can get later or pay as less as possible to be able to build as much deposit as they can? In a way, couldn't they be exactly the same thing? Because it's money going somewhere, but the banks, I'm presuming they're going to look at it differently.
They certainly are. Dave will detail this beautifully, but it's the purpose test, and you can't pay down a loan and then refinance it on a principal place of residence basis, then just refinance it and get the deductions. The ATO doesn't like that. They don't permit it. It's a little bit like those wristbands you get on. You can make them tighter and pull the string, but once you've done that, you can't loosen it up.
Yeah, so it is the purpose test, and it's very common. Look, these two key strategies we're talking about now, the one I just touched on and this one we are touching on now, are the two that confuse people the most, probably. So, a lot of people think you can just refinance, redraw the money back up to 80% and then claim it as a tax deduction. But you only get one chance to borrow to purchase an asset, and that is when you buy it. Okay? And so if you redraw the money up to, say, 80%, the next question is, where does that money go? All right? And that really determines its tax deductibility. Now, you might offset the loan and therefore the net interest is the same. So, nothing's changed whilst you're offsetting that loan. The net balance remains exactly the same. But often people then use it to fund a new home. Okay? And obviously the home isn't tax deductible. So therefore that portion of this loan would be non-deductible. And the original portion that was already in place would be deductible. So this can also then cause issues like if you're making a principal and interest repayment to this loan, well, part of it has to be apportioned to the investment debt and part of it to the non-deductible home loan debt. So it means you're not maximising preservation of your investment debt because part of that principal repayment has to be apportioned towards paying it down because you've got mixed purposes in the one loan account, which can sound quite complex. But look, the reality from my experience is almost everyone we meet with who owns multiple properties has some flaws with their loan structure.
Yep.
And they're not actually optimizing their tax deductions. So, if you were to claim that interest after it's then, you've spent part of it on the future home, which is often what people do, you're breaking tax law at the end of the day. And that's okay if you don't get audited.
Let's just say as a blanket
it's never
statement.
okay. It's just it's good if you don't get audited.
I'd like to say as a blanket statement on behalf of our legal team, which doesn't actually exist, that it's never a good idea to defraud the Australian Taxation Office. But no, we take your point, Dave. Cate, I want to go to you. I want to go to you on their future plans. So the future plans are a third property, either in South Australia or Victoria, to be an investment, looking to spend around about $1 million in the next 4 or 5 months, and then finally switching the PPOR to investment property, then purchasing a new owner-occ forever home in Brisbane. This property number 4 will be around the 1.5 mark, and we're hoping to make the purchase in 3 to 5 years' time, leaving us with 3 by $1 million investment properties, which would set us up for retirement nicely. What a conversation to be having at 34 and 33 years old. Chapeau to Nick.
Totally agree. I think that it's a very ambitious goal, and don't let me separate ambition from reality. I think that the two can go hand in hand when you've got a great plan. The cash flows certainly support it. I mean, they've shared with us what their monthly cash flows are, so their surplus. So I think they can do it. There's a couple of potential flies in the ointment that they just have to look out for and provision for. The first one is if the parents do grab that money sitting in the offset, that will certainly change their cash flows. The other one is what we've just talked about, that P&I versus interest only. And it's a common thing that people get caught up on because there's this, human nature that we all have where we just want to pay down that debt on the house that we're living in. And remaining really pragmatic and looking at this, stand back and look at it objectively. Dave's just outlined that you could go interest only, you could preserve your cash flow for other things and continue this journey. Now, the acquisition plans that they've got in their mind need them to have cash flow. They also need them to have buffers. So I think the interest-only conversation is one that they've absolutely got to have with a strategic mortgage broker because it could help them get there. But my devil's advocate question is, given that they're still young, what are the ramifications if they don't get the forever home in 5 years' time? Is that okay, or is it a devastating showstopper? Because they've got some strong debt, albeit really good debt. They've got great cash flows. So if they can work out how to have some flex in their plans so that they can get that third property and then get their family home, if it happens to go over 5 years, I don't think it's a showstopper unless they're bursting at the seams in their current home and they've got to make some other decisions. But what I would be saying is some careful planning, probably with a planner, and really maximising those cash flows and being cognizant of what happens if the parents need their money. They're the 3 things they need to get right in tandem.
Excellent advice. And Dave, I wanted to ask you as well, because there's a baby in the mix. The wife would be considered self-employed. That's always annoyed me as a business owner, right? You're self-employed. Well, no, I run a company, like it's not like I've got a lemonade stand on the weekend, but the banks really make you jump through extra hurdles if you own your own business, right?
Yeah, they sure
Yes.
do. They do. Actually, I might just come back to that point that Cate was just talking on. Yeah, because I think it is really important. So these guys, they're in a wonderful position. They clearly think ahead, and that's why they're in such a strong position. Is they're long-term thinkers. But often people can get in trouble when they have that plan for the long-term home, but they buy too many properties in advance of it.
Yeah.
And so I really, would encourage them to meet with a strategic mortgage broker or a property planner and actually work out some numbers today, because, they need to check what is their borrowing capacity if they were to purchase that next investment property and then fund a home, and see how far off they are, or if they are able to achieve it at the price points they're at right now that they think they would need to pay. Because, we've come across it so many times when we're modelling out property plans that people, we call it, and it's actually part of, if we get to the next question today, what they're like, and we've done an episode on it, the lifestyle versus investment conundrum. And often when people get to the point of deciding to prioritise the family home, it just becomes more important than anything else, and other things fall by the wayside. And often that is selling properties that had already been accumulated. And so, just building on what Cate was just saying, I really think there is a risk that if they go for another investment property, that they might need to end up selling one of them, or maybe even two, to get into the future home. And I'm not saying, as Cate said as well, don't shoot for the stars and, strive to get that, but know the numbers, and work out what actually is plausible. And, they're saying that home in 3 to 5 years, but maybe it means that future home won't be affordable for 10 years. If you model it out in a property plan, are you willing to wait 10 years? Are you willing to wait 12 years? Or do you think it really needs to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, because it might mean you flip the order and you purchase that home first and then another investment property afterwards?
Yeah. And look, we don't know when they want to retire or have, that flexible stage of life. That wasn't something in the notes, and that's absolutely imperative thing to talk about with the planner or the broker, so that there's an idea of how long we've got these cash flows for. Because if you're looking at semi-retirement when you're, in your mid-40s, well, different scenario.
Yeah, and I think great advice, Dave. We're going to get comments about who knocked over the bottle of Shiraz at 23 minutes.
Knocking my keyboard because it's off to the right with the Yeti sitting here.
Great advice from both of you, and I think when you chat to your mortgage broker, you need to say, well, this is the goal. How does going down this path impact the principal place of residence? And it might mean that there's a strategy change, but congratulations, Nick, to you and your wife. Thanks for the question, and thank you for some of the feedback on the show. We're going to implement that as well.
Oh, yeah, I was just about to say, it was Nick's idea to get us to earmark some of the content and have a little note in our show notes about when things are coming up. Not that I, minded doing that. It's added a little bit to the workload with the show notes, and it's worked really well. So, Nick, thank you. You asked and we've delivered.
But that blew
thanks,
our merch. It blew our merch budget, though, right? We were just about to buy mugs and jumpers, but now Cate has to.
I just stay up a bit later on a Monday night.
So all our listeners, you can see what topic we're talking about at which part of the episode, if you want to just move forward into a specific topic in the episode.
Yes.
Where can they find that? In show notes, Cate?
Yeah, on our website.
Yep.
thepropertytrio.com.au. We've got all our episodes up there. I get into that every Monday night.
And there's a fair bit more coming there with some video content as well, which we're pretty excited about. So jump on the YouTube channel, jump on the Facebook page, check out the website. I don't think I can plug it any harder than that. Let's get on to the next question from the lovely Jess, who's a long-time listener, first-time questioner. She's got a plug for Ryan at your business, Dave, Property Planning Australia. Very, very happy with that one.
Oh, Ryan's a legend.
Ryan,
He's like your
Ryan's
classic duck on a pond. He just looks so chilled. The sun's shining and, it's a beautiful, bright day and the duck's having a nice swim. Its legs are going mad under the water. That's how Ryan works.
Yeah, that's Ryan to a T. He's a great man and been part of the team for about 15 years, and he's an amazing strategic mortgage broker. And
he knows all the really good places to go after the staff Christmas party at 1 a.m.
Does he indeed? Well, I might have to have a chat.
We got us into that obscure club day. That was fun.
Oh, Ryan's got us into lots of places over the years.
Well done to Renaissance Ryan. Now, Jess has 3 properties, an investment property in Parkside. Her husband, George, owns 100% of that. They moved out in 2017 when the second child was near to get a bigger property. That's rented for $525 per week and about $200K owing on an interest-only loan valued at $1 million. We love those interest-only loans. Current principal place of residence is in Glandore, South Australia. $735K now, worth 1.2. So 735 was the purchase, now worth 1.2. Owing $680K on principal and interest loan, and they have $200K in the offset. They wanted to move into the suburb and the property. We want to raise our family. Prompted significant roadworks about to happen on South Road near the Glandore property. They purchased property in Loch Ness Avenue, Torrens Park for $2 million in May 2022, rented it out to allow us time to plan for renovations, and they'd like to save up a little bit more. However, after 14 interest rate rises, we feel your pain, we haven't been able to save as much as we hoped. The property's rented out for $1,050 a week, and it provides serious negative gearing benefits. They want to move into the Torrens Park property when the lease is up. They want to do a modest renovation of about $150K upstairs, and then a larger renovation, talking about $1 million in the next 2 to 4 years. So the questions: which options provide the best outcome in the long run, also now given the higher interest rates? So they've identified probably 3 strategies here. One is to sell Glandore and pay no capital gains tax and place towards the Torrens Park offset, which would be about $500K. Should they sell Parkside? The husband owns a business, so we can reduce the capital gains via tax brackets. They think this would be about $700K towards the Torrens Park offset, or hold both properties, wait for further capital gains and sell later to pay down more of Torrens Park. A cash flow would enable them to do that, but they'd only have $50K in offset, which makes them nervous. They want to keep 1 or 2 investment properties for retirement. A really important point, they've highlighted this one. Mike is a great addition. Love that one.
I need to
Sparkles.
read that.
Yeah.
How cool.
All
My
right.
goodness. Wow.
There's quite a bit in that,
There
and I
is.
apologise for having to read that in a big chunk. But Jess, she's a real mover and shaker with her husband George as well. They've got quite a lot of options. So I'm going to hand over to you guys. Cate, starting with you,
Yep.
chatting about their family home. Why have you put an exclamation mark on the family home? Because here we are talking about finance and strategy and investment, but you've made a note here about happiness.
Yeah, totally. They know what they need, and we've often talked about the family home being a really important chunk in your overall wealth journey, and I think for these two, it really is. Now, I've got a lot to break down here, and I don't want to hog the microphone for too long, but I'm sure Dave will get to that because it's often what he talks about as well. They've got options. I would like to talk about the first option, though, that they discussed, and that's Parkside. And, they've paid that down really diligently. They've only got $200 owing on the interest-only loan. It's valued at about $1 million, but it's rented for $525. got to say, that rental return doesn't sound right to me. Parkside house rents are way stronger than 2.7 gross return. So, Jess, I'd get you to have a chat to your property manager about that one. And I'd also like to talk about Glandor. You know, they secured that at such a good time. And in hindsight, who knew that that would be an amazing time to purchase in Adelaide? But it absolutely was. So they've really ridden that capital growth wave and done very, very well. But yeah, when we talk about the property that they've earmarked for home, I think it's really important that we get this right. And I'll talk later in the show about the renovation plan that they've got in terms of being a two-stage or even a multi-stage renovation plan. There are pros and cons to that, and I've seen it work very, very well for myself and for clients in the past as well. So you can ask me that down the track, Mike. But I think to start with, I'd love to hear Dave's thoughts on their money management.
Well, look, probably initially, or firstly, I'd say well done to Jess. You know, with their property acquisition and the equity they have accumulated, it's a great achievement, and they're now in a position where they have options to choose from. I mean, again, their situation really is a perfect example of the lifestyle versus investment conundrum that we come across so many times with clients when developing a property plan, and it's actually often the catalyst for people to reach out to us for help with their future property decisions. Look, and I guess my answer number one to their question from a purely financial perspective would be you're best off postponing moving into the long-term home until such a time that you can hold all three properties. You know, this would allow your equity and savings to grow in all three, your personal and rental income to increase, and your debt or net debt after offset to reduce until you're in a position that can complete the renovations in full and hold all three properties. However, it appears that the pool of lifestyle preferences is outweighing the pure financial return outcome, as it so often does. You know, this is a very, very common pattern that we see with I would say 8 out of 10 people. It's sort of stage one, begin aggressively accumulating property for wealth creation. And a lot of people don't do that, but these guys have, and our first questioners had as well, which is fantastic. Stage two, they start to plan for and possibly start a family. Stage three, lifestyle and the family home becomes the top priority. And then stage four is when it gets a bit complex. Compromises have to be made. Often properties are sold to optimise the family home and the lifestyle outcome. And then stage five, hopefully, is once the long-term family home is bedded down, that you get back into a strong enough financial position, focus on investment returns once more. So that's a common pattern for a lot of families. But you know, if you were just purely focusing on the financial outcomes, it would be putting off moving into the family home. But We'll tackle what the other options look like, but I just thought I'd begin there.
Cate, you referenced before the renovations, and we're talking about multi-stage renovation projects. Is this something that you've seen work well with clients? And you know, I sense a little bit of trepidation in this strategy. Not
at all. I think it's great for the right property at the right time. Obviously, the downside to it is often your first less expensive stage is a bit of a write-off. So you'll spend a little bit of money getting a property nice and livable and comfortable for your family, and that comes at a little bit of a cost, whether it's, you know, popping in a new cheap kitchen or repainting the property or moving some walls, whatever it might be. It's not necessarily something that stays with the house. Often you're then bulldozing the back of the house off and doing the big renovation, or you're making significant changes or moving the kitchen when you do your big renovation. So the small renovation is a total write-off for a lot of people. And I remember when I did it, we bought a property. It was perfect for us at the time. It was very dated, daggy kitchen. We wanted to make a few changes. We spent about $65,000 on it, and we really enjoyed our home from 2012 to about 2017, and then decided to do the monster renovation, which was a $400,000 renovation and move out of the property type scenario. Now, had we wanted to do that at the start, we would have had two challenges to face. The first one would have been affordability. It would have really been tough for us, and we didn't have the funds on hand at the time to go out and rent somewhere while we did that. Now, the second one would have been overcapitalisation risk. Because if I'd just bought that property that really had nothing wrong with it and then ripped the back off and conducted a $400,000 renovation, I reckon we would have been underwater for a little bit of time. So they were the two reasons why we did what we did. I've seen clients do it really well for the same reasons, but recently the best one I've seen done was actually, surprise, surprise, a lovely architect I know. Special shout out to Mike. He did an architect renovation in 2 stages on his family home, which started as a very modest little property and then became something that was suitable for a growing family. And his 2-stage renovation didn't include bulldozing or pulling apart his first stage. So it was very, very clever. And it took an architect to do that. Not many people get it right on their own. And obviously you miss the scale of economy because it's way easier to get all the trades in and get it all done at once. But if you're in a position where you need to do a 2-stage and you can talk to a professional, I think it can work really, really well.
Yeah, excellent advice there. And we don't want to be setting fire to that initial investment.
Yeah.
Dave?
Well, look, I agree. I think that is something I had that sort of as what I was going to talk about at the end, but I'll bring it forward here. I think timing is a big consideration for them before we get into the working through, selling one versus the other. I think once they do decide the pathway, it's worthwhile asking themselves if they should bite the bullet now and sell and renovate, do the full renovation sooner while they live in one of the other 2 properties, whichever one they don't sell. I mean, some of the pros for this is they could save the $150,000 that they plan to spend on the first smaller renovation, which is part of what Cate was alluding to there. Also, with regards, to inflation, I mean, this could mean the full renovation is significantly less expensive if they do it now rather than waiting 2 to 5 years. There's also the potential, and this is where, a lot of the lifestyle and property planning comes into it as well. They're, putting a value on the personal upheaval and hassle with living arrangements, living through 2 renovations versus 1 renovation. And then obviously if you get it done sooner, that provides for a longer period of stability in terms of family life and living in the Torrens home from the start earlier and without sort of having to move in and out as the second renovation takes place. Now, some of the cons you still need to consider is you might lose out on some extra capital growth and equity build up over that 2 to 5 year period, particularly if you've held both those 2 properties. And your overall financial position obviously could improve over those 2 to 5 years. But I think it should be a serious consideration once they decide on, the pathway, which property they sell, if whether they actually jump in and do the full renovation holus bolus at first go.
I also think they've got to have a look at the environment that we're in right now and ask the honest question, do we want to jump into construction right now or do we want to wait until some of those pressures that we've all been through since COVID ease? And that's certainly a consideration. And I've got a question for them. They've mentioned the Glandor property and the works that are going on. I'm just making sure I've got my facts right here. They had a...
Glandor has the significant public works, which is the one they live in at the moment, which has been part of a trigger for their... Yeah.
Now, I want to ask about that. So thinking about the civil works that are taking place, how positively or negatively will that South Road, whatever it is, extension bypass, impact your property? So in other words, will it be a fantastic thing for the area and your property will gain value because the amenity has been increased, getting around enhanced? Or are you next to a sound barrier? I mean, they're the things that we need to ask about the impact of those works on the property. Because if it's a net positive and you can ride the storm rather than have a tenant trying to ride the storm, well, then you might have some serious upside if you can hold on to it for a little bit longer as well. Yeah,
it's unclear if it's wanting to move just because of the annoyance of the works or whether it's going to be a detriment to the future value of the property, but something to consider, right? Because if it is significant roadworks, it could actually be a net positive or a net negative. So that kind of lands into it. So if we break this down, it's sell Glandor, sell Parkside, or hold on to the both and wait for capital gains. I know there's a bit of an emotional sort of question that we can't really necessarily tap into their
a hard one, isn't
desires.
it? And we're probably all misaligned on this. I mean, I'm just looking at it thinking, if you can hold them, do it. But
Yep.
I'm all about doing what you can in the early days to get where you want to in the later days. And I think my own property investing strategy would tell anyone that. And it might suggest that I waited for a little while to get my family home and put off that instant gratification. And it comes down to whether you're happy or unhappy with the current arrangement. But I also want to ask you, Dave, CGT.
Well, they sounds like they don't have any CGT on Glandor, and then Parkside would be reduced, I'd say, to a reasonable degree because they did live in that initially. But that's certainly, look, if I've got the considerations, if they did decide to prioritise lifestyle, but, you know, certainly from a financial perspective, it's better to just hold off until they can, move into Torrens and do the renovations without having to sell anything. You know, some of the key considerations are working out if they have to sell Parkside to complete the renovation, because that's the one they'll get more cash from. They'll probably get about $800,000 of cash from selling Parkside. Or can they get by with just selling Glandor, despite not getting as much cash from the sale, which would probably be ballpark around $500,000. You know, as you've just touched on, another key consideration, Cate, is which property is the better quality asset? I mean, we might assume Glandor might have some issues with the public works, but as we've mentioned, it might actually improve its desirability.
Yeah. I think
the
that
last
question
one is,
has to be asked long before what are the tax benefits.
Yes, yeah, exactly, 100%. And then they need to understand the tax implications of selling Parkside. But I think they're really the four key considerations. But I think, you know, like if they can hold on to, let's say Glandor and Parkside are equivalent quality assets, and they probably aren't, but let's say they are, you know, obviously it's preferable to hold on to Glandor because you're holding on to an extra $800,000 of equity in a property versus $500,000 or $520,000 with Glandor. So your net wealth position is almost $300,000 better if you only have to sell Glandor versus, if you sell Glandor and are able to hold Parkside. So that, I think that's the preferable way to go, just based on the numbers, if you have to sell one of the two properties or decide to.
And are you on Kate's team as well, Dave, where if they can hold, you would say to hold?
Look, when we're having these property planning conversations, it's really trying to help people decide what the priority is for them, and then also the implications. And like, say, from a pure, as I said at the start, from a pure financial perspective, try and hold all three, and you mightn't be able to move into Torrens for 10 years, 15 years, who knows? And we can model that out in our property planning models, but again, it's just modeling as well. It doesn't guarantee. So that's absolutely the best way to go from a financial perspective. But, you know, people have different priorities. So it's actually about teasing out what are the higher priorities for the couple and how they want to raise their children and where they want to live, and where they want their kids to go to school, and talking through all these things, and then helping them come to a realisation of what is the higher priority for them.
Sounds like a good question for Renaissance Ryan, who we mentioned before. And is he Renaissance or renovation Ryan? We'll find out. So there's quite a lot to unpack in that. I hope that gives some guidance to Jess. But once again, congratulations on the success to date to yourself and your husband, George. Thank you for the question. She's also given you a shout out, Cate, saying please keep the footy talk out of it. Thanks for holding firm.
Yes, I try.
We'll keep the pressure on Cate there, Jess, just because that sort of tickles us. The silly thing is that I don't even watch the football. All right, so I hopefully there's enough for the listeners there, and thank you. We really appreciate that. But There's a lot of themes in here that I think it'd be great to go to some gold nuggets from the both of you, because we've talked about the importance of, well, where do you want to live? We're talking about your life here. Yes, there's investment strategies. Yes, there's your retirement, but your enjoyment comes, in part from...
It has a value.
Your enjoyment has a value, and it comes in part from the environs. Your domicile has an impact on your well-being, your sense of your joie de vivre, if you will allow it. So, who wants to put their hand up first for today's gold nuggets?
Now it's time for us to go mining for our gold nugget property tip of the day.
Yeah, I think it's important when people are asking about paying down debt or paying principal and interest versus interest only. You've got to be disciplined to have that question. If you're undisciplined, you shouldn't be going interest only and buying jet skis, that's for sure. But if you are disciplined, you've got to think about, it's a bit like a drag race versus a Grand Prix. You don't want to rush to pay down everything when you've got a plan to unfold. And obviously, the Grand Prix, it goes for a long time and they pull into pit lane and the clock's ticking. But they've got to fuel up, and they've got to pick when they fuel up. They've got to time it and have strategy. And I think that has a lot in common with working out when you're rolling with accumulating cash flows and not retiring debt at a particular time and stage in life, and also having provisions. So that's my gold nugget.
Look, I think what comes to mind for me is the lifestyle versus investment conundrum, and how that is such a key consideration and stage of life that most people come to, where they have to decide how much ultimately resources they put into the family home. And, it's 8 out of 10 people, something like that, who will prioritise a family home. And so really there's no black and white answer to this. It's unique to every family and every couple. So really, it's about taking the time to sit down, talk, and understand what you both prioritise, because one thing we find is, very rarely are both parties in the couple on exactly the same page with what they want out of the family home as well. So part of the process is actually sitting and listening to each other. Sometimes that's best done when there's a third party in the room as well, such as a property planner. So, but going through that process, getting clear on what you prioritise, because then that, as we call it, is the big rock in the jar, and other decisions change or are made around it, because all property buying is about enhancing our lifestyle. One of it we just live in, and the other one is about driving financial returns. But it's all about enhancing our lifestyle. So it really is a matter of where you sit on the scale in terms of the family home and how it impacts your lifestyle positively.
Yeah, beautiful. And a good insight about getting on the same page, right? Because as partners in a partnership, we might not necessarily want the exact same thing at the same time. And we're talking about timing. Does one want it in 3 years, one in 5, one now, one is happy to wait for 20 years? You do have to come to a compromise. And I'd hate for these things to lead to tension and, in worst case, divorce. But it does happen. None of our lovely listeners today, I'm sure that'll happen too. But for me, it's kind of like, all right, well, if you've got your end goal, maybe you can't afford the principal place of residence, but you know that is the end goal. You want to make sure that the steps that you're taking along the way don't actually push that further away. So buying an investment property might seem like a great idea because you can build some capital growth, but is that pushing that 3 to 5 year timeline actually further, or is it bringing forward? I think that's a really important thing to keep an eye out. Now, we've, again, probably gone over time, but I think it's probably a little bit better than last time.
No, it's been good today.
Beautiful. Look at us go. But thank you very much for the listener questions. We really appreciate those and hope that we've given some insights and some general commentary that helps all the listeners as well. Guys, sign off from you.
We'll see you later. Have a good week, everyone.
See you later.